Hello. On my computer. I need to stop that. Hi, everybody. I am going to give just a second for my people from school to come over. I have been in the past live streaming these straight to my school community and then repurposing them into YouTube. And if you're on YouTube and you're like, Ellen, you haven't posted in a few weeks, that's why, because I've been struggling a lot with repurposing these guys onto YouTube. So these are going to be just to kind of make the repurposing process a bit easy. I'm going to be YouTube in the future. So hopefully everybody from school was able to make it over okay. The one thing for me is I'm gonna have to remember to update that YouTube live link every time in the future. I'm just gonna go ahead and click it. We'll communicate to make sure that it's working, and it looks like it is. So beautiful. So firstly, couple things. Is I am starting to call these microsystem Mondays instead of Notion tips of the week because I feel like I'm a Notion girly. You know me. I'm always gonna, when I give you behind the scenes of my systems, they're always going to be behind the scenes of my Notion systems. But I'm kind of rebranding it, if you will, because A, I'm going through a rebrand in general right now. If you go over to my website, you will see the rebrand that is happening. But I also feel like it shifts things away from being like isolated tips to things that are meant to be very actionable and very repeatable microsystems. And that is exactly what everything I do is about. Even with working in Notion, is it comes back to having those actionable and repeatable microsystems that we can leverage inside of our, our operating systems, inside of our workspaces. And today we're going to be talking about how to make your automations actually work for you. We're going to essentially, this was something that was a user generated, a community generated thing that wanted to be covered in regard to how to more effectively set up automations. And I thought this would be a great thing for us to tackle because in my newsletter this week, which if you're not on my newsletter, what are you doing? Go ahead and go to the link in the description. For those of you in the school community, go ahead and everybody just go to coachellen.com/list, join my newsletter. Because this week I talked about how we've got to kind of stop fighting ourselves and start designing around how we actually operate. And that actually to me very much extends into automation. Where I actually want to start this week is I did an automation masterclass legit years ago that I'm going to actually share really quickly into this. Let me go ahead and just so I can see the live stream. Beautiful. Okay, I just need to do some template rearranging. So this was part of an automation masterclass that I gave a couple years ago. And there's just a couple facets of this that I want to touch on because I actually think with automations, there's a couple things we need to think about. Firstly, in my opinion, there's two different types of automations. There's in-app automations and then there's cross-app automations. In-app automations are like, for example, if we go into Notion, and actually I'm just gonna quickly pop over into my Notion system here. If we go into Notion and you click this lightning bolt right here, this lightning bolt is how you set up automations inside of Notion. And you can do them in any database, any single database inside of Notion, you have an automation for. Okay. So that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Notion automation. So we can have in-app automations that allow something to happen that's triggered from one part of the workspace into another part of the workspace. And I would say that is primarily what we're going to be talking about today. You have automations that are going to happen in your Squarespace platform, which is what I use for my website. You're going to have all sorts of automations that can have within an application. And then there's also cross app automations. This is when you need things to communicate to each other across apps. So that would be like, for example, when somebody submits a Squarespace form on my website, I want it to go into my Notion system. We're going from Squarespace to Notion. That is a cross app automation. And for cross app automations, we need to leverage tools to help us, utilize those cross app automations. And the ones you're going to most commonly hear about are Zapier, Integrately, which honestly, I don't even know if Integrately is around anymore. Nobody ever talks about it. And then Make. And actually, there's a new one on the scene called Relay that I actually have some automations for in my automation shop that I highly, highly, highly recommend checking out. Though a lot of the stuff that you can do in Relay is becoming much more accessible in these other platforms. Now, I broke down kind of the differences in these other platforms. I'm a Zapier girly. I've been using Zapier for years at this point in time. And yes, Zapier is more expensive, but I also find Zapier is better for people who are not innately tech savvy. And it is also, sorry, go back to the previous slide. It is also better for people who it's just more user friendly. If you're newer to automations, you're probably going to want to use Zapier. Is it more expensive? Yes. I don't know if this pricing is up to date because again, this is a very old slide deck. It's more expensive. Yes. Make is just more techy. So you're going to, if you're needing automations to happen from one place to another place, you are going to need to take advantage of one of these tools to help you do that. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and I want to pop into my community here just to make sure I don't have any outreach or anything like that from the community because these are happening on YouTube today, and they usually do not. So, okay, so that's kind of the basis of what we're talking about when we're talking about automations. Then I want to talk about when to build automations because I actually think, in regard to best practices, the when to build an automation is actually a best practice because what I see so often happen, and I've actually seen it happen inside of my paid memberships, inside of my community, is people will ask me for advice on how to build an automation. Hey, Ellen, how do I do this in Notion, in the Notion automations? And then I start asking them follow-up questions. Well, do you want this to happen or do you want this to happen? Just to kind of clarify the automation they're trying to set up. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of times people don't know. They don't know the answers to those questions. And I actually think it's because we start automating too early. So here are some of my personal qualifiers for when we should start automating. And this is actually the biggest reason why I pulled up this old slide deck because it has these stages. So firstly, we should only be automating, and this is whether we're talking cross app automations or like within Notion automations. You should only be automating when you have a process that is stable and repetitive because automation is going to work the best when the process doesn't change frequently. If the steps are constantly changing, the automation is going to break or you're going to constantly be in there updating it. So if a task is repetitive, you're going to do the same sequence every single time. So we're talking about like weekly reports, onboarding new clients, updating project statuses, whatever. Maybe it's a recurring task. If it's stable and repetitive, that is a candidate for automation. The next is if it's clear and documented, which I will say this is a step that the majority of us, myself included, skip. This is like the SOP step. Okay. So before automating, we have to have clear documentation outlining what is happening. What is each step of this automation? If you can't explain it easily, it's probably too early to automate. And that's exactly what I think was happening with those clients that I was talking about a second ago, who they were trying to automate too soon because the process wasn't quite stable yet and it wasn't clear and documented. So when you've mapped out the process from start to finish in a tool like Notion or in a flowchart, that is when you know it's ready to automate. Now, the last two I would say are less, these first two are required. These, we need to have these in place for us to automate. The next two are less required. The third is if it's time consuming or prone to error. Automation, the whole point behind us automating is it's got to save you time, right? If a process eats up hours and is very prone to mistakes, it's a good candidate for automation. That's like the whole point. So if you are spending significant amount of time doing manual tasks that don't require a lot of critical thinking, if something is very prone to error, that might be a candidate for automation. And then the last one is if the volume is super, super high. High frequency tasks are ones that are going to benefit the most from automation, especially if they're high frequency and very manual tasks, right? So if scaling would increase the burden, that's a candidate for automation. So task is being performed multiple times a day, multiple times a week, that might make the payoff for automation much more worth it. And then the fifth one is that the ROI justifies automation. If automating a process is going to bring a clear return on investment, whether we're talking time saving, cost savings, fewer errors, whatever, that might be a candidate for automation as well. So if you have assessed that the time spent setting up and maintaining the automation will pay off in efficiency or quality or cost savings, that is a candidate for automation. So again, the ones that are required are the first two. It's got to be stable and repetitive, and it's got to be clear and documented. And then recommended, time consuming or prone to error and high volume. And then very contextual is the ROI aspect of this. So that, again, I'm talking about this and I'm literally doing a screen share of a slide deck, which I don't normally do on these calls because of the fact that I actually think is one of the ways that we need to make our automations work for us. And one of the things I see people commonly do wrong when it comes to when we should build automations. And this actually goes back to what I said a second ago about how we've got to stop fighting ourselves and start designing around how we actually operate. Because I think sometimes automations, we're a little like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks with automation. And I personally don't think that is the best strategy for automation. I actually think the best strategy for automation is your automation should be informed by your like lived experience. Like everything with systems should be informed by your lived experience. And this is what I mean in a business context when I do that. So, like, for example, I'm well aware that my onboarding, particularly for my paid memberships, is lacking. It's actually non-existent right now because I didn't find it to be very automatable, and I was struggling with that, and I was trying to find workarounds with that. So I kind of backburnered it for a while and then I forgot about it. That is something in my systems right now that is a glaring red flag that I am working on for sure. Trust me on that. So that is an example for me of when I get questions from people about, well, where do I access this? Well, where do I do that? That to me is like a sign of, okay, that's an automation I need, because I'm in the background going, oh, yeah, that should go out in an onboarding. That should be something that they are reminded of every single week. So, like, I've started doing a what's happening this week in my weekly newsletter because of the questions I will get of, wait, do we have a Foundations Friday this week? Do we have a implementation lab? What time's the implementation lab? So I've started to send out a what's happening this week in my newsletter as a way to address those questions. So if you are finding yourself being like, oh my God, it'd be so nice if this, oh my God, it would be so nice if this, that is a red flag that is an automation that you might benefit from setting up. And the thing that I recommend, and you're going to notice this is a very similar tip that I give people when it comes to building out their Notion systems, is to write it down, to capture it, to capture the automations you need on the fly as they come up. Anytime over the course of your work week, any kind of time over the course of your work day where you catch yourself saying, oh my God, it would be so nice if X happened when X happened. Like if this, then that. If you are finding yourself kind of thinking that over the course of your week, write that down. And what I personally do, let me go ahead and show you this inside of my Notion system. You're going to see my habit tracker first and foremost, but I have something in my Notion system that I call a tackle list. It's actually on my quick capture page as well. Ayo, get out of there. Get out of there. It's right here on my quick capture page. And actually, I should move all of this crap down lower on this page. This tackle list is basically my like idea capture. So you can see there's a whole section that says to delegate or to automate. There's actually a whole bunch of custom agent ideas down here, which actually this first one, custom agent newsletter assistant, it's done. I've already done this, so I can delete this from the idea list. But I have this whole idea of future ideas, custom agents I want to build, things I want to delegate or automate, things I want to figure out and learn. I basically put all of my ideas into this tackle list. This is an idea that I can't take credit for. Again, I did a boot camp with one of my friends who actually recently hired me to build out the systems for her organization, Kelsey Knutson. I did her CEO boot camp about a year and a half ago at this point. And that was one of her ideas from it. So what I'm saying is, as those things come up, that is a great red flag for you for what you should automate. Okay. So from here, with that, what I want to go ahead and go into now is some specific Notion best practices for building automations. And I think there's a couple different styles of automations I want to look at in here. Firstly, let's do kind of the recurring template, the recurring task side of things, because I actually personally do very much think that templates are a form of automation. Anytime you have like, maybe your Mondays all look the same. Maybe your Tuesdays all look the same. Maybe every time you go into, a call for your group program, you kind of have the same rhythm that you fall into. That is something that we can templatize. Okay. So like templates, let's look at the couple different ways we can do this. So for example, I have actually reverted back to an old way of doing recurring tasks. Let's just go over here. And I do recurring templates. And the part of the reason I did that is to have a true recurring task, or the old tasks replace the new tasks, I actually found it was messing with like some of my tracking that I'm doing inside of my systems, particularly my time tracking. So I use these recurring template features inside of Notion to help me automate some things, particularly anything that's recurring. Let's actually go into my productivity hub because it's easier to see this. So this is just my task database. And then anytime in a Notion system where you click the down arrow, you can add these different templates. And I think how we generally think of these different templates is it's like, oh, I wanted to always add this little check mark emoji every time I create a new task. That's a way you could use a template. Or like if it is a task that has subtasks, then every time I have a task that has subtasks underneath it, I want to add this little table where I can see all of the subtasks are underneath it. That is a template. You can have templates for different types of meetings you might take. But in Notion, when you have these templates, what you can actually do is you can automate how often these templates get applied. So this is my Microsystem Monday live stream. I like to just keep track of how long I am planning for it. It pulls in what the current Microsystem Monday is for that. And what I have is I have this duplicate every week. And you can see up here, you just kind of go to this drop list. I'll also show you how to access it from another view as well. But you just go up here to this drop list. I have it set to duplicate every 1 week. I have it set to duplicate on Monday. And then if I ever get to the point where I don't want to track this anymore, I just click stop duplicating and it will stop adding this. But every Monday morning, I wake up and a new Microsystem Monday has been, let's go ahead and capture this. A new Microsystem Monday, which used to be called Notion Tip of the Week, is added here. And I started tracking this one just before I started the call. So that is a simple way we can add things as well. You can also access it on this main view here by going to the three dots. And then you see the duplicate every right here. And it's the exact same view we just saw in the other one. So templates are a form of automation, in my opinion. I've templatized my weekly review. I've templatized my habit tracking. I've templatized so much stuff in my systems. So templates are absolutely a form of automation, in my opinion. And I think it's a really good form of automation just for getting started with automations. Now, another thing, so I've talked about automation types, when to build automations, templates as a form of automations. I've talked about capturing automations, and I've given you some examples for how I capture and write down my automation ideas. Let's go ahead from here and let's think of some best practices for building automations. And again, I'm just going to stick with the Notion automations for now, because I think that is an easy way to go about doing this. And I know 90% of you here are Notion people. So let's go ahead and go back in here and let's go ahead and we'll just work from my habit tracker here. So firstly, anytime you want to add an automation in Notion, it's got to be from a database, because these are where like 90% of the magic is happening inside of a Notion system, right? So you've got to be inside of a database and you've got to click this lightning bolt right here. And this is going to pop open the automation pane. If you want to create a new automation, you're going to click this blue new automation button and it's going to open this little window here. Now, this might seem like a really, really silly best practice, but I think it's a really important best practice. Please, for the love of God, name your automation with something that is obvious. You can see down here, I have steps to add walking to habits. I know what that means. I have today's date to today. Like, I know what these automation means. I have named them in a way that I understand what they mean. I think we looked at an automation just a second ago, though. I'm trying to remember where it was. That was literally like nonsensical. No, it wasn't one of those. I can't remember where it was, but it literally said something like Ellen Shinky's automation or something like that. And the reason it says that is because when you click the new automation button, look what the default name is. So if you don't type anything there, if you don't give a name to your automation, it's just going to name it with your name's automation. And when you've got a bunch of your name's automation inside of your Notion system, it gets very confusing on what automation does what, especially if you end up building a lot of automations over time. So that's a first best practice, is to name your freaking automation. But from here, just to kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown of what all of these do, is we have various different triggers that we can set up. You can set up a trigger of when any property is edited inside of a database item. You can set up an automation for when a page is added, or you can set an automation that runs at a certain frequency every day, every week, whatever. You can also set automations that trigger when properties are set a particular way. So like when something is named something in particular, when a date is edited. That I personally feel like would be a maybe unhelpful automation. When the habit property or when a particular relation property contains a particular thing. So you can set automations that are very generalized, and then you can set automations that are set to a specific property. So like I would say a relatively common automation that you might set, I don't think we have it in here, but it could be an automation if we go over to my productivity hub that is something like a status property is set to in progress or something like that. That could trigger an automation. That's a very, very common automation that can happen. Now, from here, let's go ahead and go back to the habit tracker. I like to work in here because this is a very innocuous space for us to work in. If I set a automation here, it's not going to break anything dramatically. But then we've got, these are all the triggers. This is the if this happens aspect of this. Then what we can go ahead and do is we can do a number of different things. You can edit a property in that same page. So like that's actually what some of these are. I have it set up where if I insert a step count that is greater than 8,000, it automatically adds this habit. That is a textbook example of that first automation property, an edit property automation. So that is one of our triggers. We can also have an add page to trigger. I'm trying to think of an example of when I would do this. Oh, actually, let's go to podcast submission. So all of my podcast submissions come through this podcast submission form now. Don't judge me. I have a couple that I need to process. But what I have, actually, this isn't a good example. But like, let's say you have an intake form. This could be a good example. Let's say you have an intake form. You're trying to capture client information from your website. So you've got this intake form here. You can set up an automation that when a new page is added, that it adds a page to your CRM or something like that. That could be a really, really easy way to do an automation here is when a form submission is received through this form, I want you to add a page to my CRM. That's what this might look like, this add page feature here. We also have an edit pages in. So this could be edit pages in some other database. So let's say we want to do a daily journal, and then you go in and you just say what properties you want to edit. That's another one that I find I use relatively frequently. We've got send notifications, send mail, send webhook. So this is actually really fantastic if you want some sort of, when this property changes in Notion, you want to trigger it in some other automation platform like a Zapier or a Make. A webhook is a great way to do that. And then send Slack notifications and define variables. I'm going to skip define variables for now because that's kind of an advanced property, but send Slack notifications. I have a lot of clients who have like teams that they're working with. I have a lot of clients that are using this one to send Slack notifications, like when they have given feedback on an asset for content creation or something like that. So these are all of the options. And what I would recommend doing, I think some of the best practices that you can have in automations is to, again, and I'm going to stop my share for a second to say this, make sure that your automations are being informed by a real world situation that has come up for you, a real world need, not just this would be nice to have. That's the first thing. Name your automation so that you can very easily and very clearly go back to those automations. And then I think another best practice is if you have one trigger that is going to create a cascade of a lot of different, things that are going to happen as a result, you can also, I think that's another best practice here, is to have that cascade set up here. So let's say this is such a terrible example. Let's go back to the productivity hub. Let's say when my status is set to completed, I want a number of things to happen as a result of that. Maybe I want to send a notification to a specific person. I'm just going to pick myself with a particular message. And I want to send a notification in Slack. We're just going to do blah, blah, blah. I want to send a notification in Slack. I do not have my account connected to Slack, but let's say I wanted to send a notification to somebody. I wanted to send a notification in Slack. I wanted to email my client with whatever their update is. And then I also wanted to send a webhook to Squarespace or something to trigger something happening. You can do all of these in one automation. And personally, I think that is another best practice when it comes to automations is think about what are all of the different things that I need to happen that can be triggered by one automation. Because if we can stack these automations on top of each other, here's what it does. It prevents us from having what I've got happening right here of way too many automations. And actually, I'm going to come back to this in a second, but it keeps us from having way too many automations. They're all triggered by the same thing. Now, all of these I think are triggered by different things, but it prevents you from having this sort of a situation happening where you have just a ton of automations here. So this brings me to my last thing that I think is a good automation thing as well, is to go in and triage your automations. I don't need this automation anymore, so I'm going to delete it. I don't need this one anymore. Honestly, the only automation that I really need in here is my recurring tasks automation. The rest of these, and invalid is actually a good indicator to look for. I don't know why it's not letting me delete this. There we go. Invalid's a good indicator to look for because that means you've changed something in your Notion systems that literally makes this previous automation that you've set up not functional anymore. It can't do what you previously set it up to do. Now, I would love to share with you guys a number of other automations. Probably the place that I set up the most automations in is in my CRM. If you're interested in seeing more of those automations, if you're interested in seeing more automation use cases, go ahead. If you're in my school community, go ahead and comment below this video. I'm going to go ahead and post the recording in the school community. If you are not in the school community and you're just following me on YouTube, go ahead and post a comment below the recording of this video for me to share those automation use cases. But I wanted to start with this question that I got from somebody, which was along the lines of what are kind of best practices for setting up automations. So I wanted to start by addressing that, and then we can move into use cases a little bit later. So if that's something that would be helpful for you, feel free to drop a comment somewhere. But with that, it's our first Microsystem Monday. I know this is a slightly different setup. We had a fewer users join live on this one just because I usually do these in school and I'm transitioning to doing them on YouTube just to make the repurposing a little bit easier for myself. But again, if any of this is applicable to you, if you want to see use cases, please comment below. Let me know. But with that, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being patient as I navigate this whole transition over to doing this as YouTube lives instead of school live streams. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week in the next one. Have a great rest of your Monday. Bye, everybody.